Hi, I'm Gordon Burkell from Filmmaker U. At Filmmaker U, we create courses for film professionals to deepen and diversify your existing skill set. You can learn more at filmmakeru.com or follow us on Twitter at filmmaker_u. Every week, we interview film professionals to discuss their work, and this is made possible by our sponsors, OWC. Go to owcdigital.com for all your filmmaking needs. This week, I'm joined by cinematographer Sam Levy, whose work includes Lady Bird, Frances Ha, and most recently, Mayday. Welcome to the show, Sam.
Thanks, Gordon. Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Now, when I was going through your bio and everything, it said that you studied under the French New Wave director Eric Romer. Can you tell me about that? Like, how did that come to be? What was that like?
Sure. I did study with Eric Romer. I was in college. I was a comparative literature student with emphasis on French literature. So, and part of my major, I spent my third year of college in Paris. And I was there mostly to study French literature at the Sorbonne, the university in Paris. And so I was going along studying French literature, but I was very interested in cinema at that time. And I'd taken there's one production class back at Brown. I'd taken that and I had this burgeoning interest in film. And one of my fellow Sorbonne students was also a film student. It's just a kind of a different system in Paris where there's, I think it's like 12 or 13 universities in Paris, and they all have numbers. This is, I don't know if it's still like this now, but you can take classes at this university and that university. And this young woman was telling me she was in Romer's class and that I should just come to like audit for the day. And I was, really captivated. And so I went with her and I ended up getting myself enrolled in the class was what happened. But his class was fantastic. He taught a film class at a different university called Paris Michelet, which was actually Paris University #1. I think the Sorbonne is #3. They're not like ranked, they're just assigned these numbers. And anyway, so Romer would talk primarily about his own films. And the class was actually, the name of the class was, Cinematography with Eric Romer. And I was already kind of becoming interested in cinematography, so it was great. But his class was, he would show movies with the sound off, completely off. He would never turn the sound on, and he would just talk. So it's primarily his own movies, movies like Pauline at the Beach. What else? Love in the Afternoon. He showed My Dinner with Maud. And he would just talk. And all of those movies I just mentioned were photographed by a great cinematographer, Nestor Almendros. So he spent a lot of time discussing his relationship with Nestor Almendros. So at that time, it was great for a developing filmmaker, cinematographer like me to just hear stories about a director, from a director's point of view, working with a cinematographer, and also to experience these movies, which I had luckily seen all of them already, without any sound, and to see in his very dialogue heavy movies, to see the progression of images without sound. That was very informative at the time.
So like, were there what were some of the ideas or things that you might have learned from him that you use every day now?
So the primary thing Eric Romer was, I think, from my point of view, concerned with was he was a radical ecologist. He was really devoted his life to not being wasteful. So he would show up to class. He was kind of like an oddball character. He would show up with a plastic shopping bag. He didn't carry a lot of sort of material items. I think he definitely did not have a cell phone. I think for a long time he didn't have a telephone at all. So he was just kind of eccentric, but also he famously would only film one take of anything. And Nestor Almendros writes about this in his great book, Man with a Camera. And Romer would talk about this in his class, only doing one take, but leading up to that was an intense amount of rehearsals. And part of it was, he would talk about the lack of wastefulness in myriad ways. One of them was not wasting film. Film, as great as it is to shoot film does have a lot of chemicals in its manufacturing, in its processing in the lab, in its dissemination into cinemas, more chemicals, more celluloid, more silver. And so part of it was not wanting to waste the chemicals, but part of it was also time and money. It costs money to shoot more film. It takes more time for an editor to sift through more takes. Mm-hmm. So he talked exhaustively about that. And he would also talk about the role of dialogue in his movies, which served me really well later when I eventually met Noah Baumbach, which we can talk about too if you want. But Noah Baumbach is the biggest Romer fan I've ever met in my life. His first son is named Romer Baumbach. Oh, wow. Total coincidence. And Noah's movies are similar in the way they use dialogue to tell the story. So without knowing it, studying with Romer and sort of understanding the visual progression in these dialogue-heavy movies was super informative. And then understanding his technical approach with not wanting to be wasteful or do a lot of takes, which is very bold. Nestor Almendros in his book talks about My Dinner with Maud, shooting a sequence in the snow where he did a zoom in shot. And at the time there were no mechanical zoom controls like we have now. So he himself was, zooming the lens, on the barrel. And his words, he said, I screwed it up in the middle. I didn't get it. And we cut. And I told Eric, and Eric said, no, we're moving on. Just one take, whatever it is, it'll be perfect. We rehearsed, and he begged him to do it, wouldn't do it. And it's in the movie, and he writes about how he came to accept it. And then later when I met Noah, he would really grill me 100 times worse than you are now about every single word that the actual Romer, not his son, would say, and how it might inform the stuff we got to do together.
Wow. So I really want to talk about also your you've done a lot of commercials and music videos. Mm-hmm. How do you think that stuff has influenced your fiction films?
Well, I got my start in commercials and music videos. The first ever job I had was at a commercial company in New York called Epoch Films, run by a wonderful woman named Mindy Goldberg, who gave me my first job. And my fellow intern that summer was Patty Jenkins, the director, Patty Jenkins, who did Wonder Woman and Monster. And we were camera PAs together and became camera assistants together. So the way it informed my work was that was my way in. That was my opportunity. It was, working at a commercial company, getting onto commercial sets, eventually becoming a camera assistant in commercials and music videos. And then I got into narrative filmmaking, feature films later. Still as an assistant before starting to shoot, working for Harris Savitas and other DPs. But I feel like these short form projects, it's really in my kind of professional DNA, because it's just how I learned the process starting out. So, there's slightly different infrastructure to a shoot that takes 3 or 4 days to something that takes 3 months. You pace yourself very differently. And, probably on the whole, I've often thought folks who really make a career of working on these shorter form things generally maybe have a slightly better quality of life, just in terms of the hours tend to not be quite as crazy, and maybe it's a little easier to find some balance than shooting 30, 40, 50 days on a movie and really try. It can turn into a real grind. as satisfying as the creative side of it is. So another thing, I mean, I'm giving a very technical answer to your question, but as a DP, we can go do these short form projects, commercials, music videos in between movies, and it helps us, be able to make a living. I was actually just in Toronto, your beautiful city, shooting a commercial for RBC, and it was so great. I love working in Toronto and in your country. So the way it informs the movies that I get to make is that it gives me an opportunity to be a little more selective than if I didn't have the opportunity to do commercials, music videos. I would really just have to jump on whatever job was around when I finish whatever it is I'm shooting.
I'd love to jump to Mayday because, as you said, you screened it yesterday, and how did you approach determining the look of the film?
Well, the writer and director is my life partner. Her name's Karen Cinorre, and we live together. And we developed the movie together. She's wrote it and directed it. I'm her cinematographer. We produced it together, along with a producing team. So it was very different than the usual process of I engage with on a movie, in that I really got to develop the project and help, pick the locations from the ground up and things like that. But Karen and I have worked together for a long time, and it was the first feature we made together, but we've done many of her shorts and music videos and stuff like that. So we had a great shorthand in that way. We both really love going to see live dance performance. And there's actually, I don't want to give too much away, but some that's factored into some of the things we did in the movie. And there's two dance companies that I greatly admire. One is from Belgium, and the other's from Israel. The Israeli one is called Batsheva, and the Belgian one is called Rosas. And here in New York, there's a company I like a lot, the Mark Morris Dance Company. My neighbor was a principal with them for many years. And seeing dance actually greatly informed the look of this movie. Mostly with the way we blocked the movie, the way, it's a feminist action movie. And so we were very concerned with, the way people's bodies moved around in space, and they like jump off cliffs and ride motorcycles, and there's hand-to-hand combat and stuff like that. But also there is like sort of a dance element in the movie, so watching dance helped. I try these days. I try not to look at too much photography or movies when trying to build a look of a movie, and that's just because it's what happens, whether you're trying hard or not, is whatever you look at does find its way on the screen. And I find if you look at too many movies, especially anything made in the last 10 or 15 years, it goes right up onto that screen, and your movie risks just becoming like whatever else is out there. And that's just not what we wanted. So going towards the world of dance, where there's very interesting aesthetic choices being made in terms of staging and costumes and light, all things you have to deal with in film, but it's just in a totally different direction. And that was really interesting to Karen and I for Mayday.
Well, it's interesting that you say you went to dance, because when she falls into the water, she arcs her body like a dancer and like spins around, and I was like, that's odd. Like it took me a second to click with that when I was watching it, because I was like, would you swim that way? And I was like, oh, it's sort of like a dance move almost.
Yeah. Well, that's Grace Van Patten, who plays Anna, is the star of Mayday, is a really gifted actor, and she's really gifted in the way that she moves. She's she's a surfer, and she grew up riding motorcycles, which was great for us because her character rides bikes and has to fight and run around. And she's really talented in the water. Now, that particular shot you're talking about, it's in the trailer. Mm-hmm. We had the camera turned sideways to sort of do this optical trick to make it look like she was hurling through the water in a way that is not what we're used to seeing.
Yeah.
And we were shooting in it was widescreen aspect ratio, just very horizontal. And so we turned the camera sideways, and what she was doing was jumping from a high dive into the water and plunging rather deep. So then we would take advantage of the deep plunge sideways. And we had to tell her, look, you have to try and fit, like the frame is, it starts here and ends here. The way you do, when you're making something narrative and telling people the parameters of the frame. But it's really tricky underwater, especially in this deep pool. And so she kind of would contort her body simply to fit into the frame. But it's true, we also did with Grace and also Mia Goth and Juliette Lewis and all the other actors, we did bring them into this conversation about dance and, the Rosas company, the Batsheva company, and kind of, we just really want to invite everyone into this conversation we were having, and not just be like, okay, go watch this Kubrick movie, go watch The Godfather, go look at an Eggleston photo, go look at Saul Leiter, go look at Rembrandt. All of those things are incredibly beautiful, but they're very heavily referenced aesthetics among filmmakers. So we just tried to avoid those for this one.
So if you don't do that, if you don't, when you're building something for a look for a film, you don't collect photos or screenshots or what have you. What do you turn to in terms of your own sort of collection of images for inspiration?
Great question. Well, it's not like we didn't look at stuff. We did. We started from the dance place, as I mentioned. And then here in New York, there's a great photo bookstore called Dashwood. It's on Bond Street. And I have a friend who works there who helps me with research. And she loves movies. And I can call her and say, well, we're making this movie. It's a feminist action movie that takes place sort of in another realm. It doesn't really take place in the real world for the most part. And we're looking for images of women, young women who are very active, fighting, running around, being physical. And I'll just describe whatever we're doing. And sometimes she'll pull things for me. And she knows that I don't want to see these kind of commonplace references. And the great thing about if you're fortunate to live in a city or town that has a great bookstore with someone thoughtful who just is into this kind of a conversation, it's great to bring someone else into it with the idea of not copying anything. It's just really to facilitate a visual conversation and to develop a shorthand with your collaborators. So in my case, the most important relationship I have is with the director. The most important communication starts there and then it disseminates outward. So, I pull a few things that I like. So, I always try and start with things that I'm drawn to, and I try and select a few things. So, and to be specific, there's a great Japanese photographer named Rinko Kawauchi who has a book called Halo. This book Halo, there isn't like a single face in the book. It's printed on, it's very dark, colorful, mysterious looking photos printed on matte paper. And I knew Karen would love this book, and I pulled it and I showed it to her, not so much for what the photos look like, but when you take this book and hold it in your hand and feel this really unique matte paper, it's so satisfying. And so the brief was, the movie should look the way this book feels when you touch it, just the way you feel looking at it. Not so much like, it's not really about these colors or what's actually happening. It's sort of in a different direction. So yeah, Rinko Kawauchi, we did look at this great film that's now very appreciated called Come and See. It's a Russian movie. L.M. Klimov. It's now a Criterion movie. People are talking about it a lot these days, which is great. We watched that as it's very common or similar territory. It's a war, a very kind of surrealist war movie. There's kind of almost like a surrealist action war movie. And our movie has like a kind of surrealist streak in it, but it's also an action movie. So that was interesting to us.
Well, it's interesting that you talk about the texture, because I was trying to figure out how to phrase the look of the film, because it like part of me wants to say, oh, it looks like it's like a set in World War II in terms of like the aesthetic or the texture, but then it's like it's not, it's like its own texture. I don't know how to explain it otherwise than what you're talking about, which is interesting.
Yeah, well, the costumes and the set design is very reminiscent of the Second World War because of the military costumes and the set decoration. And there's a submarine set that we built. A lot of that stuff is from that time period. So right off the bat, it takes you there. But then it is now. It doesn't really have a time period. It's kind of an Alice in Wonderland, Wizard of Oz type of story, and it doesn't. It all takes place really on this island, and there aren't so many signs or signifiers to place you in a time period outside of the war costumes and the submarine. So I can see how it.
Well, I was thinking though, and this is the terrible question, but like when I went through film school, you'd be like, oh, what film stock do you shoot on? And like nowadays people are like, what digital camera or what camera did you shoot on? If you
we shot with the Alexa Mini, not the new one, not the Mini LF, the old one, the Alexa Mini. With cookie anamorphic.
It feels
lenses.
like film. Like it feels like a tactile film when I see it.
Well, that's good, I guess. I mean, we talked about shooting film, and we looked very seriously at it. It was complicated to shoot film. Where we were shooting in Croatia, we could have done it, but it would have taken. Essentially, we would watch daily. It's about a week after shooting, whatever, and it was going back to Romer. It was going to be a big added cost, but also not just the cost. That film would probably have to get on a plane or in a diesel vehicle that would have to drive from Croatia probably to Rome. Was the Rome or Budapest? Those, we're gonna have to just expend a lot of resources to be able to shoot film, and we're doing all this complicated stuff, and I just thought it just didn't feel. It felt like it would take away more than it would give in this particular film. And Karen, when I brought it up, and shooting film was not super important to her. It was, maybe I was a little more interested in it than she was. And she would say, I just don't get, you've shot all these digital films like Frances Ha or Lady Bird, which was also digital, that I love. I just don't understand why we would go down that same road. And, and she had a point. It is very tempting. Film is so simple in a way. You shoot film and you need to be thoughtful about how you do it, but once you get it back, it doesn't really require a lot of manipulation. Nowadays, you do scan it and you do a digital color timing process just like you would if you actually captured in digital for the most part, unless it's Christopher Nolan or people who still print color, do actual like photochemical color timing. But once you do the capture, the coloring process is similar, and it just generally requires less manipulation. It's already sort of sitting in an area where things like, particularly the thing where you really see the difference is in the highlight. If for all of you, the real film geeks out there, if there's like a really bright highlight, particularly if it's behind someone, the way film will roll off that highlight is, in my experience, really kind of impossible to emulate with digital. We tried a bit, without trying to like make Mayday look like film. We did use these special Cooke anamorphic lenses that kind of flare a little more. They're called SF, or special flare Cooke anamorphics, that my friend Kayvon designed, and it seeks to emulate that celluloid highlight roll off, but you can't really. It's such a unique attribute of silver halide, the way that rolls off like that, and really lab processes that don't exist anymore, and printing on film, and but yeah, anyways, it was just felt too complicated for this movie to do that. So we just kind of tested some different methods to just take the digital edge off the image.
So was there a scene or a moment in the film that was particularly challenging to shoot that you're really proud of?
Yeah, well, there's a lot of challenging scenes. The one that was definitely the trickiest was shooting Mia Goth and Grace Van Patten riding motorcycles. It was really important to us that they have these big muscular bikes, not mopeds or scooters, and just like real dirt bikes that are just powerful. And they were riding them through the forest, and they weren't like on a smooth bit of road. So Grace Van Patten did grow up riding motorcycles, so she was a little more comfortable. I think Mia Goth, I'm pretty sure, had never been on a motorcycle or even a scooter in her life. So we did give them some motorcycle lessons, but they were never going to get on these bikes. Karen didn't want them to wear helmets for the story, so we had to shoot them on a process trailer, a motorcycle process trailer. So I'd done lots of process trailer work before, but I'd never done it on a motorcycle in the woods. That was new for me. So it was a real process of trial and error. I had a really incredible grip team. My Croatian grip, Joša Matauš, had done, he had worked on, he was key grip on Black Hawk Down, and he'd done countless enormous big movies, lots of action movies, very knowledgeable. And we tried hard mounting the camera onto the bike, and we filmed with the actors, and we went and looked at it in the editing room that night. It looked like they were in a merry-go-round. It looked ridiculous. And anyways, it took us 2 more attempts to get it, and then we finally cracked it. It was a very concerning situation where there's some pivotal moments when these characters ride motorcycles to and from locations, and I guess I know there's a lot of film students hopefully listening to this. I would just say sometimes you just have to try some things that don't work to get to something that does work, and it's normal to sort of have that trial and error. And I think I just tried to the best of my ability to manage the expectations of our producing team and our AD, who I loved, and my director Karen. And I just tried to sort of be realistic about the time frame and time management and all that kind of thing. And eventually we got it. And the day we got it, it was so exciting and great. It was really hard fought. And people may disagree. They may look at it and say, like, that looks ridiculous. It doesn't look real. And that's totally up to whomever. But for me, we got to a place where I was like, this is reasonable. It actually kind of looks like they're riding a motorcycle.
So I have one last question for you. We've been stuck in this pandemic for quite a while, and depending on where you are in the world, some people are still stuck inside a bit. Is there a show or a movie you discovered over the last year on streaming service that people should check out?
Let's see. I would say it's not necessarily something I discovered, but a movie that I came back to that's on the Criterion channel, which hopefully you guys can get the Criterion channel in Canada. Can you?
Yep. Yeah.
Okay. Go watch The Red Shoes by Michael Powell and Emmerich Pressburger. Maybe not the most original response, but that is a movie that I can watch endlessly. And actually, it's a movie we did look at for Mayday, particularly the ending. It's a movie it's about, for those who haven't seen it, it's a movie about a ballet company with a master impresario and choreographer and star ballerina, and there's lots of great dance performance stuff and behind, backstage. It's kind of a backstage movie, and it's beautiful Technicolor. And so, yeah, The Red Shoes, Powell and Pressburger, Criterion Channel.
Well, thank you so much for letting me interview today.
Yeah, my pleasure, Gordon.
And that's it for this week, everyone. Make sure to check out filmmakeru.com for our latest courses, and follow us on Twitter at filmmaker_you. And on YouTube, you can subscribe to our channel. I want to thank our guest again, Sam, for joining us. And of course, our sponsors, OWC. Go to OWC Digital for all your OWCdigital.com for all your filmmaking and computer needs.